I don't care what your ticket says. My daughter needs this seat more than you do." Those were the words that echoed through Flight 447 as an entitled passenger named Karen stood in the aisle, pointing her finger directly at a woman named Cynthia who was quietly sitting in her assigned seat. The entire plane fell silent. You could feel the tension thick in the air as passengers turned their heads, phones already starting to record what was clearly about to become an unforgettable confrontation. Cynthia, with the patience of a saint, calmly held up her boarding pass. The proof was right there. Seat 12A, her name printed clearly on the ticket. But Karen wasn't backing down. In fact, she was just getting started. Her voice got louder, more demanding, as she blocked the aisle and refused to move. The flight attendant, Priscilla, rushed over looking completely overwhelmed. You could see the panic in her eyes as she tried to de-escalate the situation. But Karen had already made up her mind. She wanted that seat, and she was going to get it. "I need to speak to someone in charge right now," she demanded, her voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence. Other passengers shifted in their seats, some recording, others just staring in disbelief. How far was this going to go? What was Karen willing to do to get her way? And then, just as the tension reached its peak, a calm voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." Karen's face lit up with a confident smirk. Finally, someone with real authority. Someone who would surely see things her way and put this difficult passenger in her place. She crossed her arms, satisfied that victory was just moments away. But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have imagined, was about to change everything. The next few minutes would turn her world completely upside down and create a viral moment that would be talked about for months. If you stand against injustice, make sure to hit that subscribe button now. Only those that support injustice won't subscribe. If you want to see how this incredible story unfolds, type yes in the comment section and tell us where you're watching from. Because after you hear what happens next, you'll understand why standing your ground sometimes leads to the most unexpected justice. But before we get to that captain's announcement that's about to shock everyone, you need to understand exactly who Cynthia is and why this moment meant everything to her. 5:30 a.m. that morning, and while most people were still fast asleep, Cynthia was already awake in her small apartment, carefully folding clothes into a worn suitcase. This wasn't just any trip for her. As a single mother of two, working double shifts as a nurse at the local hospital, Cynthia hasn't had a real vacation in over 3 years. Every penny she earns goes toward rent, groceries, and her kids' school supplies. But today was different. Today, she was finally going to see her sister Jessie get married. Something she'd been dreaming about for months. She had saved every extra dollar, skipped countless coffee runs, and worked overtime shifts just to afford this one flight. You could see the excitement in her eyes as she double-checked her itinerary for the 5th time that morning. Here's what makes this even more important. Cynthia specifically chose seat 12A, the aisle seat, not because she wanted extra legroom or convenience. 2 years ago, she was in a serious car accident that left her with chronic back pain. Sitting in cramped middle or window seats for hours would leave her in agony for days. That aisle seat wasn't a luxury for Cynthia. It was a necessity. She checked her seat assignment obsessively. Screenshot after screenshot on her phone, confirming over and over. 12A, Cynthia Wills. She'd even called the airline twice to make sure there were no changes. This trip represented months of sacrifice, and she couldn't afford any complications. When she finally boarded that plane, settling into seat 12A, you could see the relief wash over her face. She was actually doing it. After 3 years of missing family gatherings, working holidays, and putting everyone else's needs before her own, she was finally going to be there for her sister's most important day. Cynthia pulled out a small photo of her and Jessie from her purse, smiling as she remembered all the times they'd talked about this moment. She was the kind of person who never asked for much, never caused trouble, never made demands. She just wanted to do her job, take care of her family, and in this one precious moment, celebrate her sister's happiness. But just a few rows behind her, a completely different story was unfolding. Karen Mitch, A woman who lived in a world where no was never an acceptable answer. While Cynthia was sacrificing and saving for months, Karen was living in her pristine suburban mansion, driving her luxury SUV and expecting the world to bend to her will at every turn. This was a woman who would march into restaurants and demand free meals because her steak was slightly overcooked. She'd return items to stores without receipts, arguing until managers gave in just to get her to leave. Karen cut in lines, demanded to speak to supervisors, and genuinely believed that rules simply didn't apply to her. And here's the kicker. Karen had booked the cheapest possible seats on this flight, basic economy with no perks, no upgrades, nothing. But in her mind, she deserved first-class treatment anyway. She always found a way to get what she wanted, and today would be no different. She was traveling with her 13-year-old daughter Madison, and if you could see Madison's face, you'd see a teenager who had spent years being embarrassed by her mother's behavior. Madison was actually a sweet, thoughtful kid who regularly apologized to service workers for her mother's outbursts. The contrast between mother and daughter couldn't have been more obvious. As Karen walked down the aisle, scanning the seats like a predator looking for prey, her eyes locked onto something that made her blood boil. There was Cynthia, sitting comfortably in that aisle seat, and Karen decided in that instant that she deserved it more. In Karen's twisted logic, her comfort mattered more than anyone else's. Her needs came first. Her daughter, who was perfectly fine in their assigned seats, suddenly needed that aisle seat more than the woman who had planned, paid for, and rightfully claimed it. What Karen didn't know was that she was about to pick a fight with someone who had been through more challenges in 1 month than Karen had faced in her entire privileged life. And what Karen definitely didn't know was that someone very important was watching this whole situation unfold. So here's how it all started to go down. Karen strutted up to Cynthia's seat with this sickeningly sweet smile plastered across her face. "Excuse me, honey," she said in that fake, condescending tone we've all heard before. "I was wondering if you'd mind switching seats with me? My daughter and I are back there, and it would just be so much more comfortable for us." Now, Cynthia, being the polite, considerate person she is, looked up with genuine kindness and said, "I'm sorry, but I specifically chose this seat because of my back injury. I really need the aisle access." And that's when Karen's mask completely slipped off. The fake sweetness vanished instantly, replaced by this entitled rage that was honestly shocking to witness. "Look, I have medical conditions too," Karen snapped, her voice getting louder. "I need that seat more than you do." But here's where it gets absolutely ridiculous. When Cynthia politely stood her ground, Karen started cycling through lies faster than a politician during election season. First, she claimed she had severe claustrophobia. Then suddenly, her daughter Madison was terrified of flying and needed her mother next to the aisle. And get this, when those lies didn't work, Karen actually claimed she was pregnant and needed easy bathroom access. The woman was clearly in her 50s, and her own daughter looked mortified by these increasingly desperate fabrications. Other passengers were starting to notice now. Phones were coming out, people were recording, and you could feel the entire cabin watching this train wreck unfold. Cynthia remained incredibly calm, but firm. "Ma'am, this is my assigned seat. I paid for it, and I need it for medical reasons." That's when flight attendant Priscilla rushed over, trying her best to find a diplomatic solution. "Ladies, is there anything I can help with here? Perhaps we can find another arrangement?" But Karen was beyond reason at this point. She turned on Priscilla like a vicious animal, screaming about customer service, demanding to speak to supervisors, threatening lawsuits left and right. The poor flight attendant looked like she was about to have a panic attack trying to handle this situation. Madison, Karen's 17-year-old daughter, quietly leaned over to Cynthia and whispered, "I'm so sorry about my mom. You don't have to move. She gets like this sometimes." The embarrassment and shame in that young girl's voice was heartbreaking. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting started. She planted herself firmly in the aisle, crossed her arms, and announced to the entire plane that she wasn't moving until she got that seat. Passengers were getting frustrated because they couldn't get to the bathroom, flight attendants couldn't do their job, and the whole flight was being delayed because of one entitled woman's tantrum. The tension in that cabin was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Cynthia sat there, still calm, still polite, but you could see she was reaching her breaking point. This was supposed to be her special trip, her one chance to see her sister get married, and this woman was turning it into a nightmare. That's when everything changed. The cockpit door opened, and out stepped Captain Manuel Torres. Now, I want you to picture this man, calm, authoritative, with the kind of presence that immediately commands respect. He had probably been listening to this entire situation unfold through the intercom system, and he'd clearly heard enough. Karen's eyes lit up like Christmas morning when she saw him. Finally, a man in charge. Someone who would surely see things her way and put this difficult passenger in her place. She immediately switched into victim mode, pointing at Cynthia dramatically. "Captain, thank goodness you're here. This woman is being incredibly rude and unreasonable. I just asked nicely if we could switch seats because of my medical conditions, and she's refusing to help a fellow passenger in need. I've been flying for 20 years, and I've never been treated so poorly." Captain Torres listened patiently, nodding thoughtfully as Karen spun her web of lies and manipulation. You could see Karen getting more confident by the second, absolutely certain that this authority figure would validate her behavior and force Cynthia to give up her seat. "I see," the captain said calmly. "May I see both of your boarding passes, please?" Karen practically thrust hers at him, while Cynthia quietly handed over her ticket. Captain Torres examined both documents carefully, and Karen was practically glowing with anticipation. This was it. Victory was finally within her grasp. But then Captain Torres did something that nobody expected. He walked over to the intercom system and made an announcement that would change everything. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Torres speaking. I've been monitoring the situation in the cabin, and I want everyone to know that we have audio recordings of everything that has transpired here today." Karen's confident smirk started to falter. "Wait, what? Audio recordings? If you're loving this story and want to see justice served in the most satisfying way possible, smash that subscribe button right now, because what happens next is absolutely incredible. But first, let me ask you this. What do you think Captain Torres was about to do? Would he support Karen or Cynthia? Drop your predictions in the comments. I guarantee you won't see this twist coming. What Captain Torres said next went down as one of the most epic responses in aviation history. After reviewing the situation and the audio recordings from our cabin monitoring system, I am implementing immediate safety protocols. Due to disruptive passenger behavior that is endangering flight safety and violating federal aviation regulations, passenger Karen Mitch and her accompanying minor will be removed from this aircraft immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. You could literally hear a pin drop. Karen's face went from confident smugness to absolute shock in about 2 seconds flat. Her mouth fell open like she'd been slapped. "What?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with disbelief. "You can't be serious. I'm the victim here. This woman refused to accommodate my medical needs. I want to speak to your supervisor right now." But Captain Torres wasn't finished. With the calm authority of someone who'd been dealing with difficult passengers for decades, he continued, "Ma'am, our audio system recorded you making multiple false claims about medical conditions, fabricating stories about pregnancy, and verbally abusing our flight crew. This behavior constitutes a violation of FAA Regulation 14 CFR 121.580, which prohibits interference with crew member duties." At that moment, 2 airport security officers boarded the plane. These weren't mall cops, these were serious federal aviation security personnel who don't mess around when it comes to flight safety. Karen completely lost it, and I mean completely. She started screaming at the top of her lungs about lawsuits, about her rights, about how she was going to sue the airline, the captain, and probably everyone else on the plane. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who my husband is? I will destroy your career. I will own this airline when I'm done with you." The passengers around her were recording everything, and you could see people shaking their heads in disgust. This was a grown woman having a nuclear meltdown because she couldn't steal someone else's seat. But then Captain Torres dropped a bombshell. that nobody saw coming. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that the passenger who is being harassed today is Miss Cynthia Wills, a decorated veteran nurse who just 3 weeks ago worked 72 straight hours during the hospital crisis at Metropolitan General, saving countless lives during the emergency. One of our crew members recognized her and brought this to my attention. The entire cabin erupted. People started clapping, cheering, some were even getting emotional. Here was this humble, quiet woman who had been sitting there taking abuse from an entitled passenger, and she was literally a hero who had been saving lives just weeks earlier. Cynthia looked absolutely stunned. She had no idea that anyone knew about her service during the hospital crisis. Tears started forming in her eyes as passengers around her began thanking her, telling her she deserved that seat and so much more. "Miss Wills," Captain Torres continued, "on behalf of this crew and everyone on this aircraft, thank you for your service to our community. You represent the very best of what it means to be an American." The applause got even louder. People were standing up, cheering for Cynthia, while Karen was still being escorted off the plane by security, screaming threats and obscenities the whole way. But here's the part that absolutely floored everyone. Madison, Karen's 17-year-old daughter, made a choice that shocked the entire plane. As security was preparing to escort her off with her mother, she turned to the captain and said, "Sir, I'm 17, I have my own ticket, and I'd like to stay on this flight. I can travel alone." The captain looked at her with understanding and respect. "Are you sure about this, young lady?" Madison nodded firmly. "I'm sure. I'm embarrassed by my mother's behavior, and I want to apologize to Ms. Williams and everyone else she's disrupted today." Karen's screaming got even louder when she realized her own daughter was refusing to leave with her. "Madison, you get off this plane right now. Don't you dare side with these people." But Madison stood her ground. She walked over to Cynthia, looked her in the eyes and said, "Ma'am, I am so sorry for what my mother put you through. You didn't deserve any of that, and thank you for your service." The entire plane watched as this brave teenager chose to do the right thing, even when it meant standing up to her own mother. Passengers were wiping away tears, inspired by this young woman's courage and integrity. As security finally dragged the still screaming Karen off the aircraft, you could feel the collective sigh of relief from everyone on board. The toxic energy was gone, replaced by something beautiful. A moment of human decency and recognition for someone who truly deserved it. Captain Torres made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. Sometimes we have to take a stand for what's right, and today we witnessed both the worst and the best of human behavior. Thank you for your patience, and let's get Miss Williams to her sister's wedding." The cheers that erupted could probably be heard in the next terminal. As Karen was dragged off that plane, kicking and screaming like a toddler having the ultimate tantrum, something magical happened. The entire cabin broke into spontaneous applause and cheering. Passengers were high-fiving each other, laughing with relief, and celebrating the fact that justice had finally been served. You could see Karen through the plane windows being escorted across the tarmac, still gesturing wildly and clearly having an absolute meltdown. Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, Madison approached Cynthia with tears in her eyes. "Miss Wills," she said softly, "I need to tell you something. I've just been accepted to nursing school at State University, and after seeing how you handled my mother's behavior today, after learning about your service during the hospital crisis, you've become my inspiration. I want to be the kind of person you are. Someone who helps others and stays calm under pressure." Cynthia was completely overwhelmed. This 17-year-old girl, who had just stood up to her own mother to do the right thing, was now telling her that she wanted to follow in her footsteps. The two of them hugged, and there wasn't a dry eye in the surrounding seats. Captain Torres personally came back to check on Cynthia before takeoff. "Miss Williams, I want you to know that in my 25 years of flying, I've rarely seen someone handle a difficult situation with such grace and dignity. Your patience and composure today were remarkable, and your service to our community is truly appreciated." As the plane finally took off, Cynthia settled back into her seat, the seat she had rightfully paid for, planned for, and needed, and for the first time in hours, she could finally relax. The flight proceeded in peaceful bliss, with passengers around her continuing to thank her and share stories of their own experiences with entitled people. But the story doesn't end there. Oh no, it gets so much better. When Cynthia finally landed and walked into that airport terminal, her sister Jessie was waiting for her with the biggest smile and the tightest hug you've ever seen. Through tears of joy, Cynthia told her sister about everything that had happened, and Jessie couldn't believe that her quiet, humble sister had become an accidental hero at 30,000 feet. The wedding the next day was absolutely beautiful, and Cynthia was able to be fully present for every moment, walking her sister down the aisle, giving a heartfelt maid of honor speech, and dancing until her feet hurt. All those months of saving, all that sacrifice, all the stress of the flight. It was all worth it for this perfect moment with her family. But here's where the story takes an absolutely incredible final twist. Remember all those passengers who were recording Karen's meltdown? Well, those videos started hitting social media immediately. Within hours, entitled Karen was trending worldwide, but not in the way Karen expected. The videos showed her lies, her screaming, her complete lack of decency, and the internet did what the internet does best. It held her accountable. Karen, in her infinite wisdom, decided to post her own version of events on her social media accounts. She ranted about discrimination, about poor customer service, about being attacked by other passengers. But here's the thing. When you lie on social media and there's video evidence of the truth, you're going to have a bad time. Her posts were immediately flooded with the actual videos from the flight. People shared Captain Torres's speech about Cynthia being a decorated nurse. They shared footage of Madison choosing to stay on the plane rather than support her mother's behavior. Karen's lies were exposed for the entire world to see. Meanwhile, the video of Captain Torres standing up for Cynthia and explaining her heroic service during the hospital crisis became a viral sensation for all the right reasons. It was shared millions of times with captions like, "This is how you handle entitled passengers," and "Faith in humanity restored." News outlets picked up the story. Captain Torres was interviewed and praised for his leadership. The airline received thousands of positive messages supporting their crew's actions. Madison was offered scholarships to nursing programs after her story of standing up to her mother went viral. And Cynthia? Well, she returned to work at the hospital to find that her colleagues had seen the videos too. She was embarrassed by all the attention, but her coworkers were so proud of how she represented their profession with such dignity and grace under pressure. The hospital administration even used the incident as a training example of how to remain calm and professional in difficult situations. Cynthia became a local celebrity, though she never wanted the fame. She just wanted to do her job and take care of people. As for Karen, let's just say that her social media meltdown followed her for a very long time. The internet has a long memory, especially when it comes to entitled behavior and public tantrums. And here's my question for you. Have you ever witnessed someone standing up for what's right when it would have been easier to stay silent? Share your stories in the comments below, because sometimes the smallest acts of courage create the biggest impact. The world needs more people like Cynthia, Madison, and Captain Torres. People who choose kindness, integrity, and justice over convenience. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win. If this story of justice, humility, and standing up for what's right inspired you, make sure you subscribe to this channel and share this story with others. See you in our next video.